Hey guys, tonight we slip into a Europe where nightfall itself feels heavier than stone. The year is somewhere in the 1300s, and the sun's disappearance doesn't just mean bedtime. It means stepping into a world of drafty rooms, flickering hearths and superstitions that could keep you awake, even when exhaustion drags at your eyes. You might think a simple act like lying down to rest would be safe, but back then, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The medieval day ends early. As the last rays sink, candles and torches sputter to life, but they burn costly tallow, so most homes keep them scarce. Darkness takes over fast, thick, and absolute, and you find yourself retreating indoors, clutching wool or cloaks against the creeping chill. Without glass windows, the night air seeps through shutters, like an uninvited guest, carrying every groan of timber and howl of wind straight into your bones. Unlike the buzzing neon and city noise, you might know this quiet is total except for the crackle of a fire, the scuttle of mice in the rushes, or the low murmur of your family praying aloud, just in case unseen forces are listening. You sit in a one-room hut, where the hearth glows weakly at the center. Shadows crawl up the rough-plastered walls, distorting beams into shapes that make children whisper about spirits. Out in the village, the church bell tolls, marking curfew, and you know patrolmen will soon be pacing the streets. Night doesn't just belong to sleep, it belongs to danger, crime, and superstition. For peasants, that means shuttering every crack and trusting the fire not to die. For nobles, in drafty stone halls, it means tapestries and heavy curtains to keep both the cold and the evil out. The oddest thing is how everyone treats the night like a battle to be endured. Beds are lumpy straw sacks or creaking wooden frames, but it isn't just the discomfort that shapes the way you rest. It's the belief that lying too flat makes you vulnerable. Lying down, people whisper, leaves the body open to bad air or spirits pressing on the chest. Sitting propped against pillows or a carved wooden headboard feels safer, more alert, as though you might rise at once if death comes knocking. And death, in this age of plague and famine, isn't just metaphorical. It is always nearby, never sleeping. The sensory details layer thick smoke curls upward from the hearth, scratching at your throat, but its warmth is better than none. The rushes on the floor smell faintly of mildew and livestock, a reminder that tomorrow's cleaning never really arrives. Even the silence isn't silent. Outside, a dog barks, a baby stirs, and the wind presses cold fingers under the door. Imagine sleeping in an airport terminal with the heat turned off and no headphones to drown the sound. That's a decent modern comparison. You might think this ritual of bracing against nightfall sounds exhausting, but for medieval families, it was routine. They called it prudence. You might call it paranoia. Either way, you can almost feel the tension in the room, everyone wrapping tighter, shifting closer, pretending that comfort exists. And yet, historians still argue whether the posture of sitting up was driven more by fear of spirits or by medical theories of the time. As you huddle in that dim glow, the hours stretch long. Sleep won't be one gentle plunge into dreams, but a staggered surrender. First, there is first sleep, the deep early rest. Then later, long before dawn, the room will stir again. But for now, under the uneasy hush of medieval nightfall, you draw your cloak tight and try not to notice how every shadow seems to lean just a little too close. The bed you lower yourself onto tonight isn't what you'd call a bed at all. It's a sagging sack of straw laid across a wooden frame, or if you're poorer, just a pile of rushes on the dirt floor. The straw crunches when you shift, releasing a dry dust that makes you cough. Beneath it, fleas stir, ready to nibble as soon as your body heat invites them out. The truth is, medieval beds were less about comfort and more about negotiating with misery. You don't stretch out luxuriously. You fold into yourself, knees drawn tight, trying to limit contact with whatever's scratching, crawling, or digging under your skin. Picture a mattress showroom today with endless soft choices and salespeople telling you about orthopedic support. Now erase all of that. What you get instead is hay stolen from a neighbor's barn, flattened over months until it offers no cushion at all. And yes, it smells an earthy blend of mildew, sweat, and livestock. In some households, the same straw bed is shared by several people, so every turn and shuffle is felt by everyone. If you thought a squeaky dorm bunk was bad, imagine 5 people rolling over on the same crunchy mattress, stuffed with half-rotted reeds. Then there's the cold. Floors are just packed dirt, and at night the chill rises from the ground like a ghost that refuses to leave. Even when you climb onto a straw bed, the cold seeps up through the frame, numbing your back until your bones ache. Some families toss rushes across the floor, hoping to make a barrier, but these quickly mold and rot, adding a swampy smell to the already unpleasant air. Historians still argue whether peasants replaced these rushes regularly or simply layered fresh ones over the old, creating a thick composting carpet alive with bugs. Either way, it wasn't exactly a luxury. For the wealthy, things weren't as glamorous as you might imagine either. Nobles slept in larger carved wooden frames, often with curtains to trap warmth. But even here, comfort was relative. Those beds were stuffed with wool feathers or straw, and though softer, they were hardly free of pests. Bed bugs thrived in the seams of embroidered linens, and fleas didn't respect class divisions. The difference was mainly in appearance: ornate canopies, painted wood fabrics, dyed in expensive colors. A peasant's bed was practical. A lord's bed was a performance of wealth. Either way, the sleeper woke scratching. The sensory palette of the medieval bed is unmistakable. The rough wool blanket scratches against your skin. Smoke from the hearth has settled into the fabric, leaving a sour, ashy tang in the air. The smell of sweat straw and unwashed linen clings to everything, because laundry in winter is almost impossible. If you've ever forgotten gym clothes in a bag for too long, multiply that by 10 and then sleep in it. That's the medieval bedding experience, and yet families pressed on. Children curled against parents, grandparents tucked at the edges, servants or cousins squeezed in wherever space allowed. This wasn't just about comfort, it was survival. Body heat became insulation. You might lie there listening to your brother snore in your ear and your sister's elbow poking your ribs, but without them, you'd freeze. Even animals sometimes joined the bed, or at least the room, adding their warmth to the mix. In a sense, everyone became part of a single desperate organism sharing heat and air in a space that was never truly dark or silent. Now think of this: you can't just sprawl out flat. Doing so invites drafts, aches, and in some beliefs, danger. So you half sit, half recline, propped against the wall, or a wooden headboard if you're lucky to have one. Some slept in chairs or benches, resting their heads on folded arms. It feels awkward at first, but eventually your muscles learn the habit. Medical theory of the time even supported it. Physicians warned that lying flat allowed dangerous vapors, those invisible humors, to pool in the body, suffocating the sleeper. Sitting up was thought to keep the airways clear and the spirits at bay. Comfort was never the goal. Survival and superstition ruled the night. As you drift toward uneasy sleep, the sounds of your bedroom follow you. The fire spits and cracks, and somewhere in the rushes a mouse scurries. A child coughs. A pig snorts from the corner. The roof creaks in the wind. There is no silence, only layers of noise. Modern sleepers complain about city sirens or upstairs neighbors. Medieval sleepers had their own symphony livestock weather humans, all woven into a single restless soundtrack. Quirky details make the scene even stranger. Some households placed shoes or knives near the bed to ward off spirits, convinced that evil creatures prowled the night. Others hung charms or herbs, hoping lavender or rosemary might encourage peaceful rest. A few believed that turning the bed to face a certain direction could protect against nightmares. None of it truly worked, but when your nights are all ready, this miserable hope is as valuable as warmth. You shift again, straw crunching beneath you, and a flea takes the opportunity to bite. You slap at it, but there are more. The truth is, a medieval bed wasn't a refuge. It was another battlefront. Every night you wrestled the cold, the bugs, the smells, and your own aching muscles. And every morning you woke stiff, scratched, but alive. And in this world, alive was victory enough. The bizarre part isn't just the sitting posture or the bad bedding. It's that people thought this was normal. Children grew up in it, nobles endured it behind silken curtains, and peasants accepted it as part of life. You might think your mattress is lumpy, or your sheets are itchy, but compared to 1300s Europe, you're practically royalty. And so, another medieval night rolls on straw, rustling fire, dimming bodies pressed close, all of you, half sitting, half sleeping, waiting for dawn to creep back through the shutter cracks. Comfort never comes, but somehow rest does, strange, fragile, and always interrupted. You lean back against the wall, propped by a lumpy cushion or a rolled-up cloak, because lying flat feels like asking for trouble. It isn't just habit, it's survival. In the 1300s, people believed that sleep wasn't safe unless your body stayed upright. A flat position meant fluids could pool in your chest, making you vulnerable to suffocation. Doctors of the day, guided by humoral theory, warned that the body's vapors would choke a person if they stretched out fully. To sit to rest at an angle was to guard against death itself. It sounds bizarre to you now, but to them it was science. Imagine going to bed in a world where you're convinced lying down might literally kill you. Your bed isn't even designed for stretching flat anyway. Frames are short, so you sit curled knees, bent head, tilted on a pillow, stuffed with straw or feathers if you're wealthy. A noble bed might have a carved headboard or padded bolster to lean against, but for peasants, it's just the wall, rough and cold. The seated posture becomes natural even if it leaves your back sore and your neck stiff. This posture wasn't only about health, it was tied to superstition. Many whispered that demons sat on the chests of sleepers, pressing them down. Nightmares weren't just bad dreams. They were real creatures, malicious beings weighing on your lungs. To lie flat was to give them an open invitation. Sitting up, chest lifted, seemed like protection. People spoke of the mare that caused nightmare, a phantom pressing breath from your body. Today, you might call it sleep paralysis, but in the medieval mind, it was a fight with the supernatural. The angle of sleep also spoke to rank and ritual. Nobles receiving visitors in their chambers often sat half reclined in bed, propped up, cloaked in furs, giving orders or hosting conversations. The bed was both a piece of furniture and a throne. You didn't collapse flat. You maintained posture dignity, even in rest. A lord sleeping upright looked ready, alert, commanding. A peasant did it because the ground was cold, and belief said flatness was fatal. Two classes, one posture, different meanings. Let's not forget the practical side. Upright sleeping kept you warmer. In drafty stone castles, lying flat put you directly in the path of icy floor-level breezes. Sitting meant tucking yourself tighter beneath layers of wool closer to the hearth's smoke and heat. Sometimes, wealthier sleepers stuffed their beds with angled supports to make this easier, like primitive recliners. Others simply stacked pillows and leaned until they dozed. For peasants, it was less about design and more about huddling on benches or makeshift cots, their backs against timber walls, while livestock shifted in the same room. The sensory experience was peculiar. Imagine dozing upright, head drooping, muscles tensing to keep you from slipping sideways. The wool itches. Your shoulders ache. The smoky air clogs your lungs, but you endure it because it feels safer than stretching out. You wake often, shifting position, your dreams muddled by the constant awareness of your surroundings. Every creak in the rafters, every gust of wind makes you adjust, half alert, never fully surrendered to sleep. From a modern lens, it seems absurd. Who would choose to sleep upright unless trapped on a long-haul flight? Yet medieval people embraced it, and historians still argue whether this habit came from pure superstition, medical doctrine, or a mix of both. Some records describe even royalty being tucked in at an angle. Queenly beds with towering canopies weren't just ornate, they supported the idea that sleeping half-seated was healthier and holier. And of course, religion seeped into the practice. Upright posture mirrored prayer. Sleeping close to a seated position looked less like indulgence and more like vigilance, as though you were spiritually alert. Death could come in your sleep, so why tempt it by lying sprawled and vulnerable? The seated sleeper looked prepared to rise, to pray, to resist. It was a way of folding faith into the nightly routine, even in dreams. The quirky detail here is that people also believed sitting upright prevented indigestion. After a heavy supper bread pottage, maybe some ale, the body supposedly digested better if propped up. Today, doctors might recommend avoiding lying down immediately after eating for reflux. Back then, it was exaggerated into a nightly rule sit or suffer. If you've ever tried to sleep after too much pizza, you can almost sympathize, but not everyone agreed. Some physicians of the time hinted that reclining flat allowed the body to rest more fully, though they were in the minority. Scholars debate whether people always slept upright or if it was a mix, depending on class, age, or illness. Archaeological evidence shows beds long enough for reclining, suggesting not every sleeper was perpetually perched like a tired owl. The truth is, probably messy, as truths often are. Still, the cultural image of upright sleep persisted. Stories, art, and even sermons referred to people resting seated, painting it as ordinary. And for centuries, it shaped how Europe thought about rest. Not comfort, not softness, but protection from sickness spirits and the unseen dangers of the night. You lean back, further eyes, heavy body aching, yet convinced this is the safest way to drift off. The fire pops. A dog shifts by the hearth. You pull your cloak tighter, angle your head on the scratchy pillow, and surrender. Half sleep, half watchfulness, propped against the world's dangers, you finally let the dark have you. The night is never one seamless stretch. Instead, it unfolds in two acts, a rhythm so natural to the medieval mind that no one thought it strange. You close your eyes after nightfall, drifting into what they called first sleep. For 3 or 4 hours, your body sinks into a heavy, dream-filled rest. Then, as if summoned, you stir. It is the middle of the night, somewhere between midnight and 2, and almost everyone is awake. The house glows faintly with the dying hearth, and whispers move through the dark. This is not insomnia, it is custom. During this waking period, you might pray, tend to the fire, or simply talk. Peasants could mend tools by the hearth's glow, or check on animals restless in the stalls. Families murmured prayers, asked forgiveness, or whispered stories, their voices low, so as not to wake the children who had managed to keep sleeping. Couples used this quiet interval for intimacy, believing it was the healthiest and most fertile time. Even physicians recommended it. The body refreshed from the first rest was thought ready for its most important work. It is easy to imagine the atmosphere, the flicker of embers, the faint smell of smoke and straw, the hush of a household paused between two worlds. Outside, the village lies still, though a watchman may tramp past his staff, knocking on the stones, reminding you that others too guard the night. If you lived in a monastery, the bells would already be calling for matins, the midnight prayers. Monks shuffle in the dark, chanting in echoing stone chambers, while the rest of the world dozes. After an hour or so, you return to bed, ready for second sleep. This phase is lighter, filled with dreams, but also interruptions, the cough of a child, the stir of animals, the shift of your neighbor on the straw mattress. Second sleep lasts until dawn. When sunlight finally breaks through the shutters, you rise not refreshed exactly, but alive. To medieval people, this broken pattern was normal, a balance between vigilance and rest. Modern science has since found that this segmented sleep isn't unnatural at all. In fact, when people are deprived of artificial light and left in natural darkness, their bodies often fall into the same rhythm, 2 periods of rest divided by a calm waking. In a sense, the medievals were simply obeying their biology even as they clothed it in superstition and ritual. Historians still argue whether everyone practiced first and second sleep, or if it varied by class and season. Some suggest nobles with softer bedding and warmer rooms might have slept longer without waking, while peasants, pressed by cold and hunger, naturally stirred more often. During those midnight hours, the mind wandered. Dreams were shared and dissected. Nightmares were treated as omens, perhaps warnings from saints or whispers from demons. A bad dream could send someone to the church the next morning to seek absolution. A good dream might be celebrated as a blessing. The night was never just rest. It was a negotiation with the invisible. You can picture it now. The fire stirs with a crackle as someone adds another log. The smell of damp wood and smoke fills the air. A baby stirs. A dog yawns. A father sharpens a knife for tomorrow's work. The room is alive yet hushed, like an orchestra tuning between movements. There is no electricity, no sense of rushing the night away. Hours stretch long, and you simply inhabit them. Compared to your world of alarms and 8-hour expectations, it feels almost leisurely. Imagine waking at 1 a.m., reading quietly, then returning to sleep without guilt. In fact, Some modern researchers suggest that segmented sleep may have benefits time for reflection, creativity, or intimacy. But for the medievals, it wasn't about self-care. It was necessity shaped by darkness, culture, and belief. A quirky detail emerges from diaries and letters. People often used the waking time to chat with neighbors. In small villages, someone might step outside, see a light across the way, and strike up conversation. Imagine strolling next door at 2 a.m. to borrow salt, and no one thinks you're insane. For them, the middle of the night was not lonely, but communal. Yet danger always lingered. Thieves and spirits were said to roam most freely during these hours. Doors stayed bolted, charms hung above beds, prayers whispered before lying back down. Even in intimacy or conversation, there was an undercurrent of caution. The night was alive with possibilities, good and ill. When you finally return to your second sleep, it feels different. Lighter, more fragile, as though your body knows dawn is coming. Dreams take on a wandering quality, less structured, more surreal. You drift half aware of the cold, creeping back, half comforted by the warmth of family pressed close. Outside, the rooster will soon crow, pulling you back into the waking world. And so, the two-part night completes itself. First, sleep deep and heavy. The midnight waking purposeful and watchful. Second sleep, gentle and strange. It may seem alien to you now, yet it was the heartbeat of medieval nights. The bizarre truth, hidden in the way people endured the darkness. The fire is your lifeline. Without it, the medieval night becomes unbearable cold, damp, and dangerous. A hearth isn't just for cooking. It is the beating heart of the home, the single defense against the freezing dark. But fire is fickle. It eats through wood quickly, and in the 1300s, fuel is precious. You can't afford to let flames blaze all night, nor can you risk them dying completely. So you learn the art of banking the fire. Picture this as the household prepares to settle into their strange posture of upright sleep. Someone kneels at the hearth. They gather glowing embers, cover them with a thick blanket of ash, and tuck small chunks of wood beneath. It looks like suffocating the fire, but really it's teaching it to breathe slowly like a sleeper. Beneath the ash, the embers smolder all night, hidden yet alive, waiting for dawn, when a single breath of air can coax them back into flame. This ritual is so ordinary that no one questions it. To bank the fire is as necessary as locking the door or saying a prayer. Without it, you risk more than cold. A house filled with straw bedding and rushes is tinder, waiting for disaster. Too much flame, and the family burns in their sleep. Too little, and they wake stiff and frostbitten. Banking is the compromise, the careful balance between life and death. The sensory experience of it lingers in your nose and clothes. The air tastes of ash, your skin prickles with dry heat on one side and chill on the other. Sparks hiss. When you shift the wood, tiny red stars fading into darkness. The smell clings, smoke mixed with damp wool, a perfume of survival. In the silence of night, that faint glow becomes a kind of company. Children watch the embers as they fall asleep, tracing shapes in the faint red light, like modern kids staring at night lights. For the poor, firewood is scarce. Families gather sticks, dung, or peat from the fields, anything that will burn. Peat gives a heavy, earthy smoke. Dung smolders with a bitter stench. In wealthy homes, oak and beech logs feed the hearth, producing steadier, longer-lasting embers. The contrast is stark. A noble hall glows faintly warm through the night, while a peasant hut shivers around a meager, smoky pile. Yet both depend on the same act of preservation, keeping the fire from dying. There is also fear of what happens if the fire goes out. Relighting it isn't as simple as striking a match. You must fetch flint and steel strike sparks onto dry tinder and nurse them carefully. In winter, with numb fingers and damp wood, this is no easy feat. Villages sometimes kept a communal fire tended constantly, so that anyone whose hearth went dark could carry home a burning brand. Fire in this sense was not just heat, but community as shared survival tool. Banking the fire wasn't purely practical, it carried symbolic weight. Fire was sacred, tied to divine protection. Some households murmured prayers while covering the embers, asking saints to guard the flame through the night. Others believed spirits lived in the hearth itself, and disturbing them would bring bad luck. Quirky charms, iron tongs, crossed bread, left on the mantel, were meant to appease these invisible guardians. A banked fire was not merely coals under ash. It was a spiritual contract, a pact with warmth and safety. As you watch the embers dim, the room falls into shadow. The family huddles under cloaks and blankets, glancing now and then at the faint glow to be sure it still breathes. A medieval night without fire feels unthinkable, like a modern blackout in the dead of winter, but with no electric rescue waiting. The fear presses on your chest. Will the embers last? Will you wake shivering in the black cold? Every crackle is a reassurance, every puff of smoke a reminder that life continues. Historians still argue whether banking was a universally known skill or one passed down in specific regions. Some records describe women as the primary tenders of the hearth entrusted with guarding the coals, while in other places it was the duty of whoever stayed up latest. The practice appears in court records too, because a poorly banked fire could spread, consuming a thatched roof and leaping to neighbors' houses. Fire was friend and enemy, gift and threat. And here is a quirky tidbit. In some villages, embers were considered so precious that people paid debts with them. To give a glowing coal was to share life. It's not unlike lending someone a phone charger today, mundane, yet absolutely essential. Only in this case, failing to borrow correctly could mean freezing to death. As you sit upright on your lumpy bed, you notice how every sense is tied to the fire. The sight of its glow, the smell of smoke, the warmth against your skin, even the sounds, the hiss of sap, the occasional crack of a log become part of your lullaby. Without these cues, the night feels wrong. The fire's rhythm matches your own smoldering, waiting for dawn. When morning finally comes, someone rakes the ashes aside, revealing the orange glow beneath. A single puff of breath, a few twigs, and flame leaps up again, triumphant. The relief is palpable. You have made it through another night, thanks to the simple art of teaching fire how to sleep. And so the pattern continues night after night. The fire, like you, never truly rests. It shifts size and waits beneath the ash, a quiet reminder that in the 1300s, survival depended on knowing how to keep even flames asleep without letting them die. You never really sleep alone in the 1300s. Privacy is a luxury no one can afford, not even nobles. For peasants, the one-room house is crowded. Parents, children, cousins, and sometimes grandparents all share the same space. The bed, if there is one, is not for a single body. It's a patch of straw wide enough for several, with everyone arranged like sardines, knees, knocking elbows, jabbing breaths, mingling in the cold. If you've ever tried falling asleep in a crowded train carriage, multiply that by 10, and you'll have some idea of medieval bedrooms. The reasoning is simple warmth. Stone walls bleed cold, thatch roofs leak drafts, and wooden shutters barely block the wind. To sleep apart is to freeze. So you huddle together, piling cloaks, wool blankets, or whatever rags you own, using the press of other bodies as insulation. Families often tuck the youngest children in the middle, safe between parents, while older children and extended kin lay along the edges. The idea was practical. Protect the vulnerable, share the heat, endure the night as a unit. But people weren't the only bedfellows. Animals shared the room too. Chickens clucked softly from rafters, pigs grunted in pens by the wall, cows breathed heavy in the corner. Their warmth raised the room's temperature a few precious degrees. You might wrinkle your nose at the smell, but in winter, the hot breath of livestock could mean survival. Some families even let goats or lambs climb onto straw bedding, treating them almost like extra blankets. The sensory experience is unforgettable. The air is thick with smoke sweat and animal musk. The straw beneath you crackles as everyone shifts. Fleas hop between hosts without discrimination. Snores rumble like thunder, punctuated by the occasional squeal of a pig or the cough of a child. There is no silence, no solitude, only the living hum of bodies pressed close. If modern sleep doctors preach cool, dark quiet, the medieval ideal is warm, crowded, noisy. This communal sleep shapes behavior. You learn to ignore discomfort, to sleep through chatter, to accept that someone else's feet might end up on your chest. Privacy, modesty, and personal space bend under the weight of necessity. For peasants, sharing a bed wasn't shameful, it was survival. Even nobles, though they had larger rooms, often shared with attendants or guards. A lord might rest in his curtained bed, while a servant snored nearby on a bench. Kings hosted entire councils in their chambers, courtiers lounging near the royal bed. Sleep was public, communal, and anything but private. Of course, this closeness created problems. Illness spread easily. A single feverish cough could ripple through a household within days. Lice and fleas thrived. Bedbugs, once introduced, became impossible to eradicate. Families lived in constant contact, and disease made no distinction. Still, the alternative, sleeping alone in the cold, was worse. To medieval minds, discomfort was tolerable if it meant waking alive. Historians still argue how much intimacy these arrangements encouraged or discouraged. Some suggest families grew more emotionally bonded by their nightly closeness. Others point to complaints in sermons and letters about inappropriate behavior, gossip, or tensions born from too much togetherness. A quirky detail from some records shows innkeepers renting out beds to multiple strangers at once. Travelers could find themselves sleeping shoulder to shoulder with people they'd never met, trusting that the cover of darkness and shared misery would keep everyone civil. Imagine checking into a hotel and being told you'll share your mattress with two other guests. It was not unusual then. The idea of crowding extended to timing too. Remember, the first sleep and second sleep. In the waking interval between, families sometimes talked, prayed, or even argued. Secrets could slip out in whispers while the embers glowed and animals shifted in their pens. Sleep wasn't just about rest. It was a social space where lives overlapped in ways both comforting and claustrophobic. Modern comparisons highlight how alien this feels. Today, people buy noise machines, blackout curtains, and queen-sized mattresses just to guarantee solitude. Back then, solitude was suspicious. To sleep alone meant you were vulnerable, unprotected by the warmth and watchfulness of others. Togetherness was safety, even if it meant scratching at fleas and enduring the symphony of snores. The quirkiest part might be how normalized this was. Children grew up never knowing a private bed, adults accepted strangers in inns without question, and nobles conducted politics in their sleeping chambers. What you'd call a bedroom was more like a stage for survival work and community. You shift on the straw elbow, nudging against your brother's ribs, the pig snort echoing in the background, the draft slipping through the shutters. It is cramped, smelly, and loud, but it is life. In the 1300s, sleep is never a solitary act. It is a communal performance where warmth and survival outweigh comfort and privacy. And somehow, amid the chaos, you close your eyes and drift. If the peasant's night is spent in noisy, crowded huts, the noble's night offers another kind of strangeness. Step into a lord's chamber, and you'll see beds that look more like stages than places of rest. High wooden frames dominate the room, carved with saints' vines or heraldic beasts. Draped around them are heavy curtains and rich canopies, thick wool velvet or brocade, forming a private world inside the drafty hall. These curtains are not decoration alone. They are survival. Castles are stone shells magnificent by day, but merciless by night. Cold air snakes through gaps and walls hold damp like sponges. Without curtains, even a feather bed becomes an icebox. So nobles drew heavy draperies around their sleeping places, sealing in warmth like a cocoon. Step inside, and the air changes warmer, stiller smelling of wool and smoke. The canopy above doesn't just add grandeur, it traps heat, turns the bed into a microclimate. The curtains also shield against more than cold. They keep out vermin scuttling across the floor, and perhaps more importantly, curious eyes. Because remember, noble chambers were not private sanctuaries. Servants moved in and out, courtiers might gather, near guards slept in corners. The bed was both throne and stage, and privacy was a rare luxury. Draw the curtains, and suddenly you could breathe without the weight of an audience. It was as much about dignity as comfort. But even behind the curtains, life was not silent. Drafts whispered at the edges. Firelight flickered through the fabric, and the sounds of a bustling household carried on. You might hear servants stoking fires below, dogs barking in the yard, or even the clatter of late-night guards in armor. The bed canopy softened these noises, turning them into muffled background hums, but never erasing them completely. And here's the curious part. These elaborate beds were often portable. Nobles traveled with their canopied frames, dismantling and reassembling them wherever they lodged. To sleep without your curtains was to risk both health and honor. A portable bed carried by servants became a symbol of wealth, proof that even the coldest inn could be transformed into a chamber of status. Imagine checking into a hotel today and insisting your staff reassemble your entire four-poster bed before you settle in. That was the medieval aristocrats' version of comfort. The sensory impression of these curtained beds is striking. Step inside and the smell of fabric surrounds you, dyes of indigo or crimson faintly musty from damp. The air is warmer, but also heavier, thick with breath and smoke that cannot easily escape. The feel of the fabric brushing your fingers, the dim light filtering through embroidered panels, creates the sense of being enclosed in a small, private world. It is both comforting and claustrophobic. Nobles invested fortunes in these beds, treating them as heirlooms. Records show beds gifted in wills, passed down through generations like crowns. A grand canopy was not only a sleeping tool, but a declaration of power. Here lies someone who commands warmth, privacy, and dignity. In contrast, Peasants might sleep on bare boards or rushes, but the idea of curtains belonged almost exclusively to the wealthy. Still, even grandeur had limits. Fleas did not respect velvet. Bedbugs crawled just as happily through embroidery as straw. Some nobles sprinkled herbs, lavender, rosemary, mint between the sheets to mask odors and deter pests. Others relied on laundresses to beat and air the linens, though this happened less often than you'd hope. The irony is clear. You could be wrapped in gold-threaded brocade and still scratch at bites all night. Historians still argue whether curtains were more about warmth or display. Some suggest they began as practical shields against cold, while others see them as stages for ritual. After all, births, deaths, and even audiences with monarchs sometimes occurred at the bedside. Curtains could be drawn back for ceremony, then closed again for intimacy. The bed was not just furniture, it was a theater, and the canopy its curtain in every sense of the word. Think about modern parallels. Today, people buy blackout curtains to block light sound machines, to mask noise, and climate control to maintain comfort. The medieval noble tried to achieve all that with fabric and wood. It was the ancient version of a sleep pod, a low-tech attempt to create control in a world full of drafty uncertainty. A quirky tidbit: some canopies were painted underneath with stars or religious imagery. So when you lay back, you gazed at a miniature heaven. It was a way of sanctifying the sleep space, of reminding the sleeper that even in rest, the divine watched over them. It's not unlike sticking glow-in-the-dark stars on your ceiling today, except these cost a fortune and carried eternal weight. As you settle into the curtained cocoon, the difference is immediate. Outside the fabric, the chamber is echoing stone cold and vast. Inside, the world shrinks to a pocket of warmth and dim light. You hear the muffled snores of servants, the distant baying of hounds, but they feel far away. For a moment, the bed becomes its own fortress, guarding against the chill and chaos of the night. And yet even in this fortress, you sleep half upright, propped against pillows, aware that the dark beyond the curtains is alive with whispers, drafts, and the ever-present possibility of danger. In the medieval night, no bed, no matter how grand, was completely safe. But within the folds of fabric and the glow of embroidered panels, you find enough warmth, enough privacy to let your eyes close. You pull the curtains tighter, but even here in your makeshift cocoon, the night presses in. To medieval minds, the darkness outside wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. They feared something called the night air, a vaporous threat that could seep through shutters and creep under doors, bringing illness with every draft. To breathe too deeply of this air was to invite fever, plague, or death. And so the entire rhythm of sleeping upright, banking fires, and huddling close made sense within this belief the night itself was poisoned. Why such fear? Partly, it was medical theory. Doctors of the 1300s followed Galen's humoral model, where sickness arose from imbalances of bodily fluids. Air, they believed, carried vapors that corrupted those humors. During daylight, breezes seemed clean, warmed by the sun. But after sunset, the air was heavy, damp, and filled with miasma, poisonous bad air. To breathe it, lying flat, chest open, was almost an act of suicide. Practical experience reinforced the superstition. Many diseases peaked at night. Plague, cholera, fevers all seemed to worsen after sunset. People coughing or wheezing in their beds gave the impression that darkness itself carried the sickness. Add to this the chill of winter nights when breathing cold air really could cause discomfort or bronchitis, and the myth of night air became entrenched. Curtains, closed windows, and even stuffing cracks with rags or straw were defenses not just against the cold, but against invisible death. The sensory reality was convincing. Step into a medieval street after sundown, and the smells overwhelm you. Sewage trickling through open ditches refused left to rot smoke clinging to the damp. A single whiff might be enough to make you cough, reinforcing the idea that nighttime air was toxic. Indoors, the smoky hearth at least smelled familiar, even if it irritated the lungs. Compared to the stink outside the haze, inside felt safer. It's a little like preferring the smell of burnt popcorn in your apartment to the stench of city garbage trucks outside, both unpleasant, but one more tolerable. This fear shaped daily life. Windows were shuttered, at dusk doors barred tight, and children scolded for letting the air in. Herbs were hung to purify the atmosphere, rosemary, sage, lavender. Nobles burned perfumed wood or incense, filling their chambers with thick clouds believed to push back corruption. Peasants stuffed herbs into cracks or simply relied on smoke from their hearth to drive away bad vapors. If you've ever lit a scented candle to mask a foul odor, you're echoing their logic, though theirs was infused with life or death urgency. Historians still argue how much of this fear was rooted in genuine observation. Some say it was mostly superstition, a desperate explanation for sicknesses people couldn't understand. Others point out that avoiding damp night air might have had real benefits. After all, keeping warm, shutting out drafts, and burning herbs could reduce exposure to fleas or airborne irritants. The line between myth and practical survival was blurry. Quirky details abound. In some towns, it was believed that yawning with your mouth open at night allowed disease to fly in. Others thought that dreams themselves could be corrupted by foul air twisting your sleep with demonic visions. Wealthy households sometimes assigned servants to test the air, stepping outside briefly and reporting whether it was safe to open a shutter for a moment. Imagine hiring someone to sniff the breeze before you dared crack a window. The fear of night air even seeped into architecture. Houses were built with tiny windows easily shuttered. Thick draperies hung not just for warmth, but as filters. In cities, curfews limited movement after dark partly from fear of crime, but also to keep people from breathing too much of the dangerous atmosphere. Night belonged to spirits, thieves, and sickness. Staying indoors, sealed tight, felt like self-defense, and yet the irony was thick. The safe, smoky rooms were filled with carbon and soot that surely damaged lungs more than the outside air. Children wheezed, adults coughed, and yet people clung to the belief that their sealed, smoky chamber was a fortress against corruption. To them, discomfort was proof of safety. If the air burned your eyes but smelled of rosemary, it must be clean. The modern parallel is uncanny. Think of how people obsess today over air purifiers, scented sprays, or filters. We know more about germs, but the instinct is the same. The air feels dangerous, so we control it however we can. The medieval obsession with night air may look foolish, but in its own way, it rhymes with your world's anxieties about pollution, smog, or even viruses carried in droplets. As you sit propped against your bolster blanket drawn to your chin, you listen to the hush beyond the curtains. The fire mutters low. A faint draft teases at the fabric, and your breath quickens. Is it cold air or sickness slipping in? You close your eyes, pretending the heavy smell of lavender sachets is enough protection. And as the night stretches on, you realize that in this age, fear itself is as present in the room as the embers glowing on the hearth. Close your eyes. in the 1300s. And dreams are not private fancies. They are messages, warnings, even battles fought with unseen forces. Sleep itself is dangerous, and the visions it brings are treated with suspicion. If the day belongs to toil and ritual, the night belongs to dreams and nightmares, and these can shape the choices of an entire household come morning. The medieval mind doesn't separate science superstition and faith the way yours does. Dreams are real tangible things. They come from God, or the saints, or far more frightening, the devil himself. A dream of a golden field could be read as a blessing, a sign of prosperity. A dream of drowning might be a prophecy of illness or death. People record them in letters, confess them to priests, or discuss them during the midnight waking between first sleep and second sleep. What you see in your dreams could mark you for good or ill. Nightmares, in particular, terrify. They are not dismissed as tricks of the mind, but physical assaults by spirits. The nightmare, a demonic being, was said to sit on your chest, crushing the breath from your lungs. People woke gasping, paralyzed, convinced they had survived an attack. Today, you might call it sleep paralysis, but for them, it was a brush with the supernatural. Some described dark figures at the edge of the bed or pressure on their limbs, proof that spirits had been prowling. It was not your imagination. It was war. The sensory details of these dreams bled into waking life. You might wake drenched in sweat sheets, tangled heart racing. The smoky air of the room feels heavy, as though the dream's weight lingers. Your family huddled nearby may stir whispering prayers, making the sign of the cross, or burning herbs to cleanse the air. Even the smell of lavender or rosemary feels like armor against invisible invaders. Dream interpreters thrived in this world. Collections of dream guides circulated offering explanations. To dream of teeth falling meant death in the family. To dream of fire was passion or wrath. To dream of water was change, sometimes good, sometimes ruin. Ordinary people consulted these guides like manuals searching for meaning in the shadows of sleep. Historians still argue whether these books were widespread among peasants or confined to literate elites, but the underlying truth is clear dreams were maps of the future. Religious institutions leaned heavily into this. Monks preached about the dangers of sinful visions urging confession for impure dreams. Saints were said to appear in sleep, delivering warnings or miracles. A noble might boast of a dream that foretold victory in battle, framing it as divine endorsement. The line between personal vision and public prophecy was thin. One man's nightmare could become an entire village's omen. Quirky details add color. Some believed cheese before bed caused nightmares, while herbs like poppy or valerian could invite peaceful dreams. Others placed iron knives or crucifixes near the bed to ward off night demons. Even the position of sleep mattered. Lying on your back was said to invite evil visions, while curling on your side kept you safer. Upright sleeping, already common, doubled as a way to fend off nightmares. From a modern angle, it almost sounds like a collective sleep study experiment gone wrong. You wake with indigestion and call it a demon. You experience sleep paralysis and believe it's a spirit. You dream of falling, and instead of shrugging, you brace for disaster the next day. But remember, this was a world with few explanations for illness, sudden death, or disaster. Dreams filled the gap. They gave shape to fear and offered a way, however flawed, to prepare. This belief shaped daily choices. A farmer might delay planting if his dreams were ominous. A noble could change travel plans based on a troubling vision. Entire battles were postponed or hastened because a leader claimed a dream demanded it. The practical world bent to the strange dictates of the sleeping mind. Think of it this way. You check your phone each morning to see the news, the weather, or your calendar. Medieval people woke and checked their dreams. These were their headlines, their forecasts, their instructions for the day. Strange, yes, but in a way, it was their logic. The eerie thing is how often these experiences mirrored real phenomena. Bad air indigestion, cramped posture, or fevers could cause hallucinations. The sensations of pressure paralysis and fear are real even today. Modern medicine names them. Medieval minds gave them personalities, demons, and divine messengers. Different language, same experience. And so, as you drift in that dim, smoky chamber, body propped upright, you dream. Shapes blur, voices whisper shadows, lean close. You wake with a jolt, heart pounding, certain you weren't alone. Your family stirs, reassures you, maybe prays over you. But deep down, everyone knows the night is never just sleep. It is a battlefield of the unseen where spirits, saints, and demons pass freely. In the morning, you will remember the dream and weigh its meaning. Was it a warning, a blessing, a trick? Your day may be shaped by the answer. And as the cycle repeats, dream after dream, nightmare after nightmare, the medieval night remains not just bizarre, but profoundly haunted. Midnight is never silent in a medieval town. Long before mechanical clocks chimed the hours, the night was divided by the steady rhythm of bells, cries, and footsteps. You lie in your bed, half upright, crowded with family smoke, lingering in your nose, and outside the world keeps watch. These are the watchman's hours, and their sounds are the pulse of the night. Every town, even the smallest, had some system of guarding against fire thieves and mischief. In larger cities, professional watchmen patrolled the streets, carrying staffs, lanterns, or even small horns. Their job was to keep order while everyone else slept. They called out the hours, sometimes singing or chanting, announcing all's well, to reassure or to warn. For you tucked in straw or beneath a canopy, those voices are both comforting and unnerving. Comforting because it means someone is awake while you rest. Unnerving because their very presence reminds you that danger lurks. The sounds layer into a strange symphony. A bell tolls from the church, marking matins for monks. A watchman's staff taps rhythmically against cobblestones. Dogs bark at the movement. Somewhere in the distance, a drunkard yells, answered by shushing voices. The air is never truly still. Each sound travels through narrow, crooked streets, echoing off stone, drifting through shutters into your restless dreams. Watchmen were more than timekeepers. They were enforcers of curfew. In many towns, commoners were forbidden to roam after dark unless on urgent business. Anyone caught wandering risked being fined, questioned, or even jailed. Lantern light sweeping across the street could expose secrets, an illicit meeting, a thief sneaking home, or simply someone desperate to fetch a midwife. You snug in your shared bed, know that only the desperate or the reckless tempt the watchman's hours. Still, their role wasn't glamorous. Many were poorly paid, ill-equipped, and resented by townsfolk. Some fell asleep, on duty leaning against doorways until morning. Others were mocked in songs as bumbling or corrupt. Yet they remained essential. Fires were common, spreading fast through thatch and timber. Without watchmen, whole districts could burn before dawn. Thieves, too, prowled most freely at night, cutting purses or raiding storerooms. The watchman's cry was a fragile barrier against chaos. Inside monasteries, the watch of the night was different, but equally strict. Bells rang at intervals, calling monks to prayer. Matins, then lauds broke the darkness with chanting that echoed across valleys. For nearby peasants, those voices drifting through the night were eerie yet reassuring. While demons haunted dreams and thieves haunted alleys, the monks stood as guardians of the soul, filling the air with hymns. If you were lying in bed near an abbey, the faint murmur of prayer might replace the watchman's call as your midnight soundtrack. The sensory experience ties everything together. You're drowsing, leaning on a lumpy pillow, when a bell clangs. The sound is heavy iron on iron, echoing through the cold night air. You hear the watchman's voice next low and dragging 1 o'clock, and all's well. His lantern light briefly glows at the edge of your shutter. The dog beneath your bed growls then settles. The embers in your hearth crackle softly in answer. Night isn't silence. It's a patchwork of signals reminding you that life and danger persist. A quirky detail emerges in records sometimes watchmen doubled as town criers shouting out lost items news or even gossip while on patrol. Imagine being woken at 2 a.m. by a guard announcing that someone's pig has gone missing. The line between security and entertainment blurred, and for insomniacs, these midnight pronouncements became part of the night's ritual. Historians debate how effective the watch really was. Some argue it deterred crime and gave towns structure. Others note how often fires still consumed neighborhoods and thieves still thrived. Yet the psychological effect mattered most. To know someone was pacing the streets while you slept offered reassurance, even if it was imperfect. The watchman's hours stitched a sense of order into a world that otherwise seemed ruled by darkness. From a modern perspective, it's a bit like hearing police sirens or the hum of streetlights outside your window. You don't love the sound, but it reminds you that society is still functioning while you rest. For medieval people, those calls of all's well were the equivalent of today's security cameras, a fragile illusion of safety, but one people clung to. And so, as you drift back into your second sleep, you fold these sounds into your dreams. The bell, the staff, the voices all mingle with your visions of saints or demons. When morning comes, you'll remember fragments of both unsure, which belong to the waking world, and which to the sleeping. That's the strange power of the watchman's hours. They kept the boundary between sleep and wakefulness porous, reminding you that even in slumber, the world outside never truly rests. The medieval night is not only guarded by watchmen and punctuated by bells, it is also ruled by prayer. For monks, nuns, and the deeply devout sleep itself must bow to ritual. This is the world of the religious vigil, where the dark hours are not wasted in slumber, but consecrated to God. If you lived near a monastery in the 1300s, you would hear the bells toll deep into the night, summoning the community to rise. At midnight came matins, the great vigil of prayer. Imagine monks pulling themselves from narrow wooden cots, rubbing weary eyes slipping into heavy robes, their sandals scraping cold stone floors. They move in silence through echoing cloisters, lit only by flickering torches, until they gather in the chapel. Their voices lift into chant, filling the air with sound as vast as the darkness outside. For the monks, this is not an inconvenience. It is their duty, their discipline. The night is when demons are strongest, and so prayers must be strongest too. By breaking sleep, they echo Christ's own vigil in Gethsemane, keeping watch with him in spirit. It is an act of spiritual warfare as much as devotion. Every note of chant is a shield, every psalm a weapon against the creeping dangers of the unseen night. But this rhythm does not belong only to monasteries. Lay people too observed vigils, especially on holy days. Villagers might gather in churches for all-night services before great feasts. Candles turned sanctuaries into islands of light against the dark. Hymns rose as families dozed on benches. Children curled beneath cloaks, half asleep, yet present in worship. The line between sleeping and praying blurred, both treated as offerings to God. The sensory details are vivid. Picture the stone chapel at night. Walls cold as ice air, heavy with incense torchlight, painting long shadows across carved saints. The sound of Gregorian chant rises and falls, layered voices echoing until it feels like the building itself is singing. Outside, the wind claws at shutters. But inside, the rhythm of sacred words shields those who keep vigil. You shiver from the chill, but also from awe, the sense of standing between heaven and earth in the darkest hours. Quirky customs surrounded these vigils. Some believed staying awake on certain feast nights brought blessings or visions. Pilgrims kept vigils at shrines, lighting candles and whispering prayers until dawn, hoping for miracles. Others saw them as penance, an offering of lost sleep to cleanse sin. To modern eyes, it might look like unnecessary exhaustion. To them, it was holy economy trading rest for grace. Not everyone found this easy. Even monks nodded off, during matins heads, drooping voices fading. There are humorous complaints, preserved in manuscripts of brethren who snored mid-chant, earning sharp nudges from neighbors. Sleepiness was itself considered a temptation of the devil, a weakness to be resisted. To fight it was to prove one's devotion. Imagine trying to chant Latin prayers at 2 a.m. After a day of hard labor, you can sympathize with their struggles. Historians debate whether these vigils truly reshaped sleep patterns or simply added to existing habits of segmented rest. Some suggest that ordinary people, already waking in the middle of the night, found it natural to attach prayer to that interval. Others argue the Church imposed its rhythm, bending human biology to spiritual discipline. Either way, the night became sacred time, broken not only by dreams and watchmen, but by deliberate pauses for worship. This culture of vigil infused daily life. Nobles kept private chaplains who roused them for midnight prayers. Families prayed aloud during the waking period between first and second sleep, reciting psalms or Ave Marias before returning to rest. To go a night without prayer felt reckless, like leaving your door unbolted. In a world where plague and famine struck without warning, who would risk ignoring heaven in the hours when hell was said to prowl? The modern equivalent might be the glow of a phone screen at 2 a.m. when you scroll news feeds or whisper late-night thoughts. The medieval vigil was their version of checking in, but instead of messages from friends, they sought messages from God. Different rituals, same restless hunger for meaning in the hours when sleep doesn't quite hold. A curious tidbit: certain saints were thought to visit sleepers during vigils, offering visions or healing. People even dozed intentionally in churches, hoping that proximity to relics would invite holy dreams. Falling asleep in a pew wasn't shameful. It was almost strategic, a way to merge slumber and sanctity. So as you lean against your straw bolster or velvet pillow, you listen. From the monastery beyond the fields, faint chant drifts through the night. It mixes with the crackle of your hearth, the snores of your kin, the distant bark of dogs. The effect is mesmerizing, a soundtrack of survival, vigilance, and devotion. You close your eyes, and whether you join in prayer or simply drift back into second sleep, you are part of a world where night is never empty. It is claimed by faith as fiercely as by fear. The medieval night is long, and no one expects to sleep through it without interruption. After the first stretch of rest and the wakeful hours filled with prayer talk or whispered worries, the stomach begins to stir. This is when midnight meals and ale come into play, a quiet but essential ritual of the 1300s. You can imagine the scene. The embers in the hearth glow faintly, and someone stirs them just enough to coax out a little light. A pot hangs nearby, holding broth or porridge left from the day. The family rouses softly. A child asks for bread. A parent dips a ladle. The smell of warm grain fills the room. Eating in the middle of the night doesn't feel strange to them. It's part of the rhythm, a pause between first and second sleep. Ale is the drink of choice. Not the heavy, intoxicating brew of feasts, but small ale, a weak, low-alcohol drink, safe enough for children. Water is rarely trusted. It's too often polluted, so ale fills mugs morning, noon, and night. In the darkness, sipping warm ale soothes the body and eases the mind, warding off both thirst and cold. For nobles, the drink might be spiced wine or mead, richer and sweeter, carried by servants into curtained beds. For peasants, it's the familiar tang of small ale brewed in the same hut where they sleep. The sensory details are grounding. Picture the steam rising from a pot of cabbage stew mingling with the smoke of the hearth. The taste is plain salted, sometimes sour, but comforting. The ale smells faintly yeasty, a reminder of grain and labor. Hands wrap around wooden bowls, warming numb fingers. The crackle of a log, the murmur of voices, the slurp of broth, all create an intimacy that turns the cold night into something bearable. This midnight meal is not just about hunger, it's about rhythm. The body, half rested after the first sleep, expects fuel before diving into the second. Monks in monasteries did the same after matins. They often ate bread and cheese before returning to bed. Travelers wrote of inns where bread and ale were served by candlelight in the dead of night, strangers eating shoulder to shoulder before crawling back into shared beds. Hunger does not respect clocks, and medieval people shape their nights around it. Quirky customs appear in records. Some believed eating onions or garlic at midnight could repel evil spirits during the second sleep. Others avoided heavy meat for fear of inducing nightmares. Families with means sometimes saved sweet treats, honey cakes, dried fruit for this interval, treating it as a small celebration. Imagine it as their version of a midnight snack, but wrapped in superstition and necessity. Historians still argue whether these meals were common in every household or only in those who could afford the extra fuel and food. Some evidence suggests peasants relied mostly on bread crusts and leftover broth, while wealthier families indulged in more elaborate spreads. Either way, the practice of eating in the night was widespread enough to be noted in chronicles, sermons, and even medical texts. Physicians often encouraged light meals at midnight, claiming they steadied the humors and prevented restless dreams. The communal nature of these feasts cannot be ignored. Families talked quietly while eating, discussing dreams, worries, or plans for the next day. Midnight became a time of conversation when the usual bustle of work was paused and voices carried softer intimacy. Secrets were shared over ale confessions whispered into the dark. If first sleep restored the body, midnight meals restored the bond of family and community. Think about modern parallels. You might creep into the kitchen at 2 a.m. for a snack, comforted by the glow of the refrigerator light. For medieval people, the glow came from the hearth, and the comfort came from knowing others were awake too. They did not sneak, they gathered. Midnight eating wasn't indulgence. It was normal, even expected. Of course, the dangers of fire remained. Relighting the hearth too brightly risked disaster, so meals were eaten by the faintest glow. Servants in noble houses carried trays carefully balancing candles, making sure embers didn't spark into tapestries. In peasants' huts, a pot could be tipped into the ashes, filling the room with smoke, but not much flame. Safety was always precarious. The ritual also intersected with religion. Some fasts allowed food only after sundown, so midnight meals became a way to honor rules while still feeding the body. Pilgrims stopping at shrines often shared food in the middle of the night, their prayers punctuated by bites of bread. The blending of hunger devotion and superstition gave the act of eating an almost sacred cast. And yet, despite all this, the strangeness remains. Imagine waking in the dark, not fumbling for your phone, or groaning about lost sleep, but calmly eating porridge with your family, then sliding back into bed for another 3 or 4 hours. The rhythm feels alien now, but for them, it was as natural as dawn. As you sip your last mouthful of ale, the warmth spreads through your chest. The fire glows, shadows soften, the room grows still again. Children curl up, parents pull cloaks tighter, animals settle in the straw. Bellies filled, the family slips back into slumber, ready for second sleep. Outside, the watchman's staff knocks, monks chant faintly in the distance, but inside the meal has done its work. And so, the medieval night continues interrupted, not by glowing screens or neon signs, but by embers, broth ale, and the timeless human need to share food before returning to dreams. When the road called and the medieval traveler sought shelter, the strangeness of sleeping upright at home was matched by the strangeness of sleeping away. Inns were not havens of privacy, but crowded hives where strangers shared bed's breath and sometimes more than they bargained for. To rest in an inn was to step into a communal experiment in survival, comfort, and suspicion. Imagine arriving after sunset. The streets are dark, the watchman's cries fading behind you, and the flicker of firelight spills from a timber-framed building at the edge of the square. The smell hits first stew, bubbling in a cauldron ale souring in barrels, smoke heavy in the rafters. Inside, voices clash, mugs slam, and bodies press together at trestle tables. You pay the innkeeper sometimes with coin, sometimes with goods, or even a promise, and you're pointed toward a chamber. But forget modern hotels with neat rows of keys and private beds. Most inns offered a handful of chambers with large mattresses often stuffed with straw or feathers, and each one was shared. Travelers, merchants, pilgrims, laborers, even nobles climbed into the same bed. Sometimes 3 or 4 to a mattress. Men and women, strangers and companions pressed shoulder to shoulder. Curtains, if they existed, divided space, but often you simply lay where you were told. The sensory details overwhelm. The bed smells of sweat, unwashed wool, and perhaps a hint of herbs scattered by hopeful cleaners. Lice crawl through seams, bed bugs nip at ankles, and fleas leap freely between hosts. You shift, trying not to breathe too deeply of your neighbor's ale-soaked breath. Snoring begins in waves punctuated by coughs or muttered prayers. The straw crackles beneath you as bodies settle. If home felt crowded, the inn feels suffocating. And yet this was normal. Few expected privacy. People were accustomed to sleeping in groups, and the inn simply expanded the family bed to include strangers. To them, the oddity wasn't the closeness, but the mix of class and origin: merchants next to peasants, pilgrims next to gamblers. Conversation sparked in whispers, secrets traded in the dark. Pilgrims might exchange tales of miracles, merchants share news of distant markets. For many, the inn was as much about information as it was about rest. Quirky details from records show the discomfort too. Some inns required guests to sleep sitting up, crammed on benches, if beds were full. Others allowed only the wealthy to stretch out while the poor sat by the hearth dozing upright. In some towns, innkeepers charged extra for bed space, meaning you could pay less but risk sharing with double the strangers. Imagine buying a half ticket to a mattress. You'd get the corner, but not the whole. The dangers were real. Theft was common, with travelers waking to find purses or boots gone. There are tales of daggers hidden beneath blankets, ready in case a bedfellow turned violent. Diseases spread easily in these cramped quarters. Priests warned against the immorality of mixed beds, though sermons rarely stopped the practice. Inns were crossroads of humanity, for better and worse. Historians still argue whether inns were truly filthy, or if some maintained decent standards. Records of prestigious establishments described featherbeds, sheets aired in the sun, and even attendants who brought warm drinks to travelers. But for the majority, the experience was rough, more akin to a modern hostel crammed with strangers than a luxury lodge. The sensory chaos lingers. The chamber is dark, lit only by a guttering candle. You feel the heat of bodies pressed close, hear the wheeze of someone fighting sleep, smell the tang of sweat mixed with spilled ale. The straw scratches at your skin, and you wonder whether the itch on your arm is from the bedding or the fleas. Outside, hooves clop on cobblestones as a late rider arrives. Inside, the bed creaks as someone shifts, elbow jabbing your ribs. Yet oddly, some found comfort in this. To sleep among many was to be safer than alone on the road. A thief might strike, but at least you weren't exposed to wolves or bandits under the open sky. The presence of others, however loud, smelly, or strange, was a kind of shield. Even nobles used to grandeur accepted it when traveling. Curtains and attendants could soften the blow, but rarely erase it. Think of modern parallels: budget airlines, overnight buses, or hostels, where privacy vanishes and survival means tolerating snores, smells, and strangers. The medieval inn was all of these combined, with the added weight of superstition and the ever-present possibility of theft. Yet just like today's traveler, medieval people shrugged and endured, telling themselves it was all part of the journey. A quirky tidbit: some inns became famous not for their comfort, but for the dreams people claimed to have there. Pilgrims insisted visions visited them in certain roadside lodgings, as if the mingling of holy intent and weary bodies created fertile ground for the divine. Others swore inns were haunted with spirits wandering among the sleeping, tugging at blankets or whispering in ears. To dream in an inn could be a blessing or a curse. As you close your eyes in such a place, your body, stiff against the lumpy mattress, you know true rest is unlikely. But you also know this is what the road offers. You eat your share of bread, sip ale, mumble a prayer, and let exhaustion drag you under, hoping your purse is still tied at your belt when dawn arrives. The medieval inn was never just a bed. It was a gamble, a crowded theater of survival played out each night across Europe. The village inn may have been crowded and chaotic, but in the stone halls of castles, the night brought a different kind of strangeness. Here, sleep and watchfulness blended into one another. For a castle was not simply a home, it was a fortress, and the dark hours were its most vulnerable time. To rest in such a place meant living inside the rhythm of the night watch. Imagine the setting high walls looming against the sky battlements outlined by moonlight and the echo of footsteps on stone corridors. Inside, nobles lie in curtained beds, servants doze on benches, and the air smells of smoke and damp mortar. Yet beyond those chambers, guards pace ceaselessly. The castle never truly sleeps. While the lord draws curtains tight, others walk the rampart's eyes, scanning for torchlight on the horizon or the shadow of a raider creeping through the trees. The duties of these watchmen were rigid. At intervals, horns or bells marked their rounds. Some carried lanterns, others only the moon and stars to light their patrol. In winter, cloaks wrapped tight, they stamped feet against the frost, their breath steaming in the cold. A guard at a castle gate might pace in silence for hours, listening to the rustle of wind in the moat or the distant cry of an owl. The monotony was broken by fear, every creak or snap of twig a possible threat. The sensory picture is sharp. Cold stone under boots, torches crackling the weight of armor pulling on shoulders. From the high walls, the countryside stretches out in darkness, fields silvered with frost rivers reflecting moonlight. Below the castle yard sleeps in patchy silence, horses shifting in stables, dogs barking at shadows. Inside, the faint hum of voices filters from the great hall, where servants bank fires to keep embers alive until dawn. Noble families, though more secure, were not immune to the vigilance of night. Some kept personal guards inside bedchambers, men who stood at the foot of the bed while their lord slept. Curtains were drawn not only for warmth, but to create the illusion of privacy in a room that was never truly private. In larger castles, entire garrisons rotated through watches, their duty more about deterrence than actual combat. Still, the knowledge that dozens of men stayed awake while you lay in feather bedding created its own atmosphere. Comfort mingled with unease. Quirky customs surrounded these watches. In some places, guards were required to shout hourly calls, announcing the time and their presence. All is well echoed across battlements, a ritual both practical and theatrical. In others, silence was enforced, no speech allowed, so as not to alert potential enemies. Records even show fines for guards caught sleeping their dereliction, treated as a betrayal not only of their lord, but of every soul in the castle. Punishments could be severe stocks, lashes, even dismissal. Historians still debate how effective these watches were. Some argue they were symbolic, more about reassuring nobles than providing real protection. Others point to chronicles of raids foiled by sharp-eyed sentries. The truth likely lies between the night watch was both practical and psychological, a way to tame fear by putting human eyes against the darkness. The sensory overlap between watchers and sleepers is fascinating. While guards squinted into the dark, nobles behind curtains dreamed of spirits or saints. Both experienced the night as a realm of danger, one external, one internal. The noble prayed for safety from demons and dreams. The guard prayed not to miss the sound of an approaching army. Both lived in a world where sleep was a negotiation with fear. A quirky tidbit: some castles trained dogs and even geese as part of their night watch. Geese, notoriously loud, were kept in courtyards as living alarms. Their honking at intruders was as valuable as any man's shout. Imagine drifting to sleep while knowing your fate might rest on the vigilance of a goose. Modern parallels aren't hard to find. Think of security cameras, night guards, and alarm systems, silent witnesses to your slumber. The medieval castle relied on flesh blood and instinct instead. Where you might trust an electronic beep, they trusted a man's shout from the wall, a torch lit in warning, or the honk of a goose. Different tools, same need reassurance that someone is awake so you can dare to close your eyes. Inside the chamber, the noble lies propped against pillows, the heavy canopy forming a private cocoon. The draft seeps under the curtains, but the knowledge of men pacing the walls allows sleep to come. Outside, a guard coughs, shifts his pike, and stamps his frozen feet. He too longs for rest, but his wakefulness is the price of his lord's uneasy dreams. And so, the castle night is divided. Some sleep, sitting up wrapped in warmth and illusion of safety. Others stand rigid against the cold eyes, straining into the void. Both know the darkness hides danger, and both cling to ritual to make it through until dawn. If the castle watch kept danger outside the walls, the medieval night also brought battles inside the body. When illness struck, treatment often took place not at sunrise, but in the quietest hours of darkness. Midnight medicine was as much ritual as remedy, blending herbs, charms, and whispered prayers into a strange choreography of care. Picture a hut where a child stirs with fever. The family, already half awake between first and second sleep, rouses fully. A mother stokes the embers, coaxing light enough to see. She reaches for a pouch of dried herbs, sage, rosemary, maybe chamomile, and drops them into boiling water. The steam fills the room, carrying sharp, comforting scents. The sick child sips the brew, grimacing at the bitterness, while the family murmurs prayers. Night air presses at the shutters, but within the hut becomes a small apothecary. In monasteries, the rhythm was more formal. Infirmaries staffed by monks worked through the night, their schedules shaped by the bells. When matins ended, some brothers went not back to bed, but to patients' cots. They lit lamps of tallow, checked pulses, prepared draughts of wine mixed with ground herbs. Their remedies came from herbals books that cataloged cures for everything from stomach ache to plague. Midnight was not idle time. It was an interval for healing. The sensory impression is rich. A smoky room glowing with dim flame, the sharp tang of garlic or vinegar in the air, the rasp of a mortar grinding roots. Someone coughs into a cloth. Another groans softly. The healer's hands, rough and steady, mix poultices or press cool cloths to a forehead. The taste of the potion lingers bitter and metallic, but perhaps it eases the pain. For the sick night, medicine is hope wrapped in ritual. Quirky practices abounded. Some believed potions had to be taken at exact hours, often midnight, or before cock-crow for maximum effect. Timing was linked to astrology. Certain stars or phases of the moon were thought to strengthen remedies. Others insisted prayers to specific saints accompany each dose. Saint Apollonia for toothache, Saint Blaise for throat troubles. Healing was never purely physical. It was spiritual, cosmic, and communal. Historians still argue whether these night practices helped or harmed. Some remedies like chamomile for fever or mint for digestion likely offered real relief. Others, ground gemstones, bloodletting, or charms of wolf teeth, did little beyond placebo. Yet in a world with limited options, the ritual itself provided comfort. Families believed they had acted, that they had not left their loved one helpless against unseen forces. Midnight was also the hour for more desperate measures. A toothache might be soothed with clove oil, but if it persisted, a hot iron or crude extraction could be attempted in the dark. The screams mingled with prayers, and neighbors whispered of demons being driven out. A fever might be treated by bleeding, the patient's arm nicked while shadows danced on the wall. Even if the science was flawed, the drama of the act gave meaning to suffering. The modern parallel is striking. Think of late-night trips to emergency rooms or waking to administer medicine to a sick child. The clock still bends around illness. Today, it is digital beeps and white coats. In the 1300s, it was herb smoke and whispered Latin. Both worlds share the same urgency. When the body suffers, the night cannot wait. Quirky details show how fear of night air intertwined with healing. Windows were kept shut during treatments, even if the room grew suffocating. Herbs were burned to cleanse the atmosphere. Some families placed bowls of vinegar near the sickbed to trap bad vapors. Others tied amulets, crosses bones, or runes around the patient's neck. Every sense was recruited: smell, taste, sound, sight, and touch, all layered in a tapestry of cure. The role of women was crucial. Mothers, midwives, and wise women held knowledge passed down orally. At midnight, they became doctors, brewing teas, binding wounds, and soothing with chants. Some were respected. Others feared as witches if treatments failed. The line between healer and sorceress blurred easily in the dark. Men might grumble by day, but at night they sought these women's help, trusting their skill when no priest or physician was near. Monks, too, recorded unusual remedies suited for the night. One manuscript advises mixing wine with ground pearls for insomnia. Another prescribes boiled nettles against nightmares. Some treatments targeted the spirit as much as the body: holy water sprinkled on beds, relics placed under pillows. Healing was never just about health. It was about survival in a world where sleep and sickness seemed woven together. The sensory strain of tending the sick through the night left its mark. Imagine drowsy eyes stinging from smoke hands, sticky with honey used in poultices, ears ringing with the patient's ragged breathing. Outside, the watchman's call drifts faintly, reminding you the world still turns. Inside, you hover between despair and determination. Will the fever break before dawn? Will the potion work? You don't know. But in the ritual of midnight medicine, there is at least the illusion of control. And so, the medieval night is shaped not only by fear of spirits and drafts, but by the urgent work of healing. Families gather around the sick monks, chant in infirmaries, herbs boil in pots. Between first and second sleep, the body is vulnerable and the community responds. Medicine, ritual, and faith converge in those fragile hours, keeping illness at bay until morning light. If illness was one great enemy of the medieval night, fire was the other. Nothing haunted the imagination of townsfolk more than the sudden cry of fire tearing through the darkness. In a world built of timber thatch and open hearths, a single spark could mean ruin. To sleep at night was always to flirt with danger. To sleep deeply flat on your back was almost reckless. Picture a small town around 1300. The houses crowd tightly together, their upper stories leaning over narrow streets. Roofs are thatched, floors are strewn with rushes, hearths glow in every room. Embers smolder long after supper, meant to be coaxed back to life at dawn. Yet those same embers are treacherous. One gust of wind through a crack in the shutter, one careless log rolled too far, and the night can become a furnace. The sensory image is vivid. The smell of smoke, always faintly present in every house, suddenly thickens. Flames lick upward, snapping rushes like kindling. Dogs bark madly. Church bells, toll watchman shouts ring through the streets. In moments, Neighbors pour into the lanes, carrying buckets, blankets, and anything that might smother the blaze. The glow paints faces red shadows leap wildly, and the heat is unbearable. Fire at night is not just destructive, it is chaos incarnate. Communities lived with this fear constantly. Laws were passed requiring townsfolk to cover their hearths before bed. Special iron lids called curfews from the French couvre-feu cover fire were placed over embers to choke flames overnight. Even so, accidents were common. A candle tipped in an inn, a torch dropped in a stable, and within hours, whole districts might vanish. Chronicles are filled with accounts of towns half destroyed in midnight blazes. Quirky customs grew from this terror. Some people kept buckets of water permanently by their beds. Others slept with clothes close at hand ready to flee. In castles, guards were assigned not only to the walls, but to the hearths, making sure no fire roared too high. Certain saints, like Saint Florian, were invoked nightly as protectors against flames. Families murmured his name before sleep, the medieval equivalent of checking the smoke alarm. Historians still debate how much of nightly vigilance was practical and how much was superstition. Covering fires clearly reduced risk, but charms and prayers offered little real protection. Yet both gave families a sense of control. In a world where one accident could erase generations of work ritual was as important as reason. The sensory burden of living with this fear shaped how people slept. Upright postures weren't just about health or demons, they also made it easier to wake quickly if danger struck. Imagine dozing propped on bolsters, cloak wrapped tight, listening for the crackle of a neighbor's roof. Light sleep was safer than deep slumber. To wake in seconds might mean the difference between life and ashes. Oddly, some communities treated fire as a kind of spectacle. When a blaze broke out, townsfolk rushed to help, but also to watch. The sight of flames devouring wood sparks leaping into the sky bells clanging. It was terrifying, but also mesmerizing. Travelers wrote of entire villages standing in streets, faces lit orange, half praying, half staring in awe. The same fire that destroyed also united bucket lines, formed strangers worked together, and for a moment, the whole town was awake, bound by urgency. A modern parallel lies in your fascination with disaster footage. Today, you might watch videos of wildfires or storms horrified, but unable to look away. Medieval people lived this in person, often several times in their lives. Their nights were punctured not only by dreams and watchmen's calls, but by the very real possibility that their world might ignite while they slept. And yet fire was not only feared, it was needed. The hearth was life. It cooked food, gave warmth, boiled medicine, lit rooms. Without it, survival was impossible. So people courted danger every night, taming the flames, just enough to last until morning. The curfew lid symbolized this fragile balance, not extinguishing the fire entirely, but smothering it enough to survive until dawn. Quirky details remind us of their ingenuity. Some households scattered ashes over embers to keep them alive without flames. Others placed clay pots filled with coals under beds for warmth, a practice that sometimes led to suffocation. Even attempts at safety carried risks. To sleep with fire was to strike a bargain, one that could easily be broken. Picture the sensory reality again. You lie propped against your bolster cloak, tight around your shoulders. The room smells faintly of smoke, but softer now the embers covered. Outside, the night is hushed, punctuated by a distant dog bark. You close your eyes, half alert ears tuned for any unusual crackle. The warmth comforts, but unease lingers. Fire is both friend and foe, never entirely trusted. And so the medieval night was shaped by more than superstition. Practical fear of fire gave weight to the odd habits of sleeping lightly upright and in groups. It made the watchman's hours vital, the bells reassuring the prayers essential. To sleep was to gamble with more than dreams. Every ember glowed with promise and peril, and every night ended with relief when dawn revealed walls still standing. If the threat of fire haunted the medieval night animals, made it noisy, unpredictable, and sometimes surprisingly intimate. For peasants and even many townsfolk, sleep did not happen in quiet sealed bedrooms. It unfolded in rooms that doubled as barns, stables, or coops, where the breath of animals mingled with human dreams. Night was a chorus of snores, bleats, grunts, and clucks, an orchestra of survival. Picture a single-room peasant hut in the 1300s. One end holds the hearth glowing faintly under its curfew lid. In the center, the family huddles in a shared bed, cloaks pulled tight, propped on straw-stuffed bolsters. And along the walls, chickens roosting on beams, a goat tied near the door, maybe a pig rooting softly in straw. In colder regions, even cows were brought inside their warm bodies, doubling as living furnaces. To modern eyes, it sounds chaotic. To medieval minds, it was practical genius. The sensory details are vivid. The air is thick, warm with animal breath, heavy with dung spiced with smoke. A hen stirs rustling feathers before settling again. A pig lets out a low grunt. The cow shifts hooves, scuffing the floor tail swishing. These sounds mix with the snores of children and the soft mutters of adults slipping into second sleep. It is not silence, but a dense tapestry of life woven from necessity. Animals were more than heat sources, and they were wealth embodied. A cow represented milk butter and calves. A pig meant future feasts. To keep them indoors was to guard them from theft or predators. Wolves still prowled in many regions, and foxes or stray dogs threatened poultry. By sleeping together, families kept their most valuable possessions within arm's reach. Night was security patrol, and barn keeping in one. Quirky details emerge in records. Some households built lofts above the animals, sleeping literally over pigs or cows warmed from below. Others placed chickens directly under beds, the birds providing both heat and occasionally inconvenient clucking at odd hours. One chronicle even mentions goats being tied at the foot of beds, their presence believed to ward off spirits as much as thieves. Of course, the downsides were obvious. Fleas, lice, and other vermin spread easily between humans and animals. Smells were constant, and disease could pass from stable to bed. Yet these inconveniences were tolerated, even normalized. For most, the choice wasn't between comfort and discomfort. It was between life and death in freezing winters. In towns, the mingling was less direct, but no less noisy. Streets teemed with pigs, geese, and dogs that roamed freely. At night, their sounds drifted into chambers, geese honking at shadows, dogs fighting over scraps, roosters crowing too early. Inns, in particular, were notorious for animal disruptions. Travelers dozed upright in crowded beds, while oxen lowed in nearby stables, their calls carrying through thin walls. For a light sleeper, the night was a test of patience. Monasteries and castles, too, were not immune. Stables within castle walls echoed through stone corridors. Monks in rural abbeys sometimes shared cloisters, with cats or dogs kept for rodent control. Animals like fire were unavoidable companions of medieval sleep. Their presence shaped the sensory texture of the night for every class of society. Historians still argue how much this closeness influenced health. Some suggest exposure to animals strengthened immunity. Others point to increased risk of diseases like anthrax or plague. Yet medieval people rarely questioned the arrangement. To them, warmth and security outweighed invisible risks. What we call unhygienic, they called practical. Modern parallels come easily. Think of people today who let cats or dogs sleep in their beds. Now, imagine scaling that up, adding pigs, goats, and chickens to the mix. The medieval hut was the ultimate pet-friendly household, though comfort was never the point. What mattered was survival through long, brutal winters. Quirky beliefs also tied animals to the spiritual world. Dogs were thought to sense spirits prowling at night, their sudden barking treated as warnings of invisible visitors. Cats, both valued for rodent control and feared for links to witchcraft, were treated with suspicion if they stared too long into shadows. Even the rooster had symbolic weight. Its crow at dawn was said to drive away demons, making its nighttime false alarms less annoying than reassuring. The sensory overlap is striking. You half asleep, shift on your straw bolster. A chicken stirs beneath your bed feathers, brushing the rushes. The pig in the corner snorts, rolling over. Outside, geese honk sharply, setting dogs barking. For a moment, you wonder if danger is near, but then silence settles again, broken only by the steady warmth of animal breath. Sleep returns, shaped by a strange comfort in the closeness of beasts. From a storytelling perspective, the mingling of humans and animals in medieval sleep highlights the fragile line between civilization and nature. Houses were not sealed sanctuaries, but porous shelters where people and beasts coexisted in uneasy harmony. To dream in such a place was to dream with hooves, snouts, and feathers, only feed away a reality both bizarre and profoundly human. And so, the medieval night continues. Upright sleepers lean against bolsters, cloaks pulled tight, while animals murmur, grunt, and breathe around them. It is not a night of silence, but of life, pressed close together, bound by survival. In the morning, the rooster's crow will mark not only the dawn of a new day, but the triumph of having made it through the long, noisy dark. If animals gave the medieval night warmth and noise, superstition gave it weight. For people of the 1300s, darkness was never neutral. It was charged, dangerous, alive with unseen forces. To sleep at night was to risk exposure not only to fire or thieves, but to spirits, demons, and curses that prowled when the sun was gone. Picture yourself lying half upright in a crowded bed. The fire is smothered under its curfew lid. The hut is dim, and outside the fields stretch under moonlight. Every creak of timber, every brush of wind at the shutter carries meaning. A dog's sudden bark is not just noise, it is a sign that something invisible passes. A rooster, crowing at the wrong hour, warns that witches are near. Superstition fills the silence with stories. The sensory world reinforced these fears. Darkness was heavy absolute, broken only by flickering torch or candle. Shadows stretched long and strange, across walls, twisting into shapes that felt alive. Dreams, too, seemed porous. Visions of saints or demons might slip into the mind, their presence as real as any waking encounter. To the medieval sleeper, night was not emptiness, but a battlefield of unseen forces. Charms were everywhere. Families hung sprigs of rosemary, garlic, or rue near beds to ward off evil. Children might sleep with crosses or carved amulets under pillows. Some households scattered salt across thresholds, believing it blocked spirits from entering. Candles blessed at Candlemas were prized for lighting through dangerous hours, their flames seen as both physical and spiritual defense. Quirky beliefs abounded. A cat staring into darkness was thought to see demons. Waking from a nightmare meant you had been ridden by a witch or spirit. To prevent this, some people placed iron objects near the bed, believing spirits feared metal. Dreams were dissected endlessly. To dream of water meant illness of fire, meant good fortune of animals. Well, that depended on the beast. A dog in dreams could be loyalty or death. Interpretation was itself a night-long occupation. Historians debate how deeply these superstitions shaped actual behavior. Some argue they were cultural wallpaper, always present, but not always acted upon. Others note how many sermons and records rail against foolish night fears, proof they were widespread enough to trouble church authorities. Either way, they flavored every act of sleeping, eating, or praying in the dark. Even posture had superstitious weight. To lie flat was to tempt death, your body mimicking a corpse. Upright or prop sleep was safer, signaling to spirits that you still belonged among the living. Some even avoided covering faces with blankets, fearing it invited suffocation by night hags. The act of sleep itself was a negotiation with unseen rules. The communal setting intensified these fears. One person's nightmare became everyone's story. A child crying out in sleep could be seen as evidence of a spirit's visit, prompting prayers from the whole family. In inns, strangers swapped tales of ghostly apparitions in certain villages or of witches flying over fields by moonlight. Superstition was not only fear, but entertainment, filling wakeful hours between first and second sleep. Modern parallels are easy. Think of scary stories told at sleepovers, or the way you hesitate at a creak in your house at 3 a.m., despite knowing rationally it's just the pipes. The medieval world had no pipes, only darkness and imagination. Without explanations, superstition was the natural glue that held together their experience of the night. Quirky tidbits show how superstition also intersected with medicine. Some physicians prescribed not only herbs, but prayers, charms, or even astrological calculations. A potion might be drunk at a certain hour, under a certain moon phase, to ensure spirits did not interfere. Healing and superstition were inseparable, especially at night, when reason felt weakest. The sensory overlap is striking. You drowse against your bolster, the cloak around your shoulders, growing damp from breath. A sudden thud outside jolts you awake. The cow shifts, but you wonder, was it really just the cow? You whisper a prayer, fingers tracing a wooden cross by your bed. Slowly, your heartbeat eases, and you slip back into slumber, half convinced you've driven away something unseen. And so, the medieval night is thick with more than smoke and snores. It is dense with superstition, with layers of invisible meaning woven into every sound and shadow. To sleep was never simple. It was to trust charms, prayers, and posture to keep you safe until dawn. When the cock crowed at last, it was more than a marker of time. It was a signal that the worst was over, that light had triumphed again. If peasants endured nights of smoke, animals, and charms, the nobility slept in a different theater altogether. For them, the bed itself was not only a place of rest, but a stage of wealth, power, and status. In the 1300s, a bed could reveal more about your rank than your clothing or your feast table. To lie down at night was to perform privilege. Picture a lord's chamber in a castle. The walls are hung with tapestries to block drafts embroidered with hunting scenes or saints. At the center stands a great bed, 4 posts, rising tall, carved with intricate designs, draped with heavy curtains of wool, silk, or velvet. Beneath the canopy, feather mattresses pile high, sometimes 2 or 3 stacked. Coverlets shimmer with gold thread. Fur linings, or imported linens from Flanders. Entering such a room was like stepping into another world where sleep itself bowed to grandeur. The sensory contrast with a peasant hut is startling. Here, the air smells not of dung and smoke, but of beeswax candles and perfumed herbs tucked into pillows. The bed is soft, sinking warm with layered furs. Curtains enclose the sleeper, creating not only warmth, but intimacy. Within, sounds of the noisy hall fade, replaced by muffled stillness. To slip into this bed was to step into a cocoon of luxury guarded by wealth and wood carving. But these beds were more than comfort. They were symbols. A nobleman might host visitors in his bedchamber conducting business while propped against cushions. The bed became a throne of sorts, signaling intimacy, favor, or hierarchy. To be invited to sit upon it was an honor. To be excluded was an insult. The very act of sleeping upright, bolstered by pillows, reinforced the image of authority, even in rest. Quirky details underline this. Inventories of noble households list beds as prized possessions often handed down as heirlooms. Some beds were so massive they had names like ships or castles. Others traveled with lords, from estate to estate, dismantled and reassembled like portable palaces. When royalty visited, entire towns scrambled to provide beds suitable for their station, sometimes building new ones, just for the occasion. Historians debate whether the nobility truly slept better than commoners. Feather mattresses and curtains offered comfort, but parasites and drafts still lurked. Insects did not respect rank, and even the finest beds could harbor fleas. Some argue the display mattered more than the experience. The bed was theater designed to impress visitors, not necessarily to guarantee rest. The sensory paradox is striking. You lie propped in silks, the scent of lavender heavy in the air, and yet you still hear the faint scratching of vermin. The curtains block cold, but also trap stale breath. The richness soothes the eye, but cannot entirely erase the discomfort of the medieval world. Even status has limits. Still, the symbolism endured. For queens and noble women, beds were stages of politics as much as rest. Childbirth often happened in these curtained spaces, witnessed by attendants and chronicled as dynastic events. Death, too, often came in bed, the curtains drawn not for warmth, but for solemnity. A bed could cradle a ruler, from birth to death, the axis of a noble life. Modern parallels are easy to spot. Think of luxury mattresses sold today, their marketing promising better health status or romance. The medieval noble's bed carried the same weight, not merely a tool for rest, but a proclamation of identity. Just as today's advertisements boast thread counts, yesterday's inventories boasted embroidered curtains and imported linens. The human urge to turn sleep into spectacle is timeless. Quirky tidbits add humor. Some nobles reportedly traveled with their favorite pillows, refusing to sleep without them. Others complained bitterly in letters about inferior beds when visiting peers. Imagine a medieval aristocrat grumbling like a modern traveler about bad hotel mattresses. Comfort, it seems, was negotiable, but the symbolism of a grand bed was not. The sensory memory lingers. Picture yourself not as a peasant this time, but as a lord reclining against embroidered pillows, a fur-lined cloak draped over you. The fire crackles in the hearth, tapestries flutter gently with a draught, and servants stand quietly at the chamber's edge. The weight of wealth presses as surely as the warmth of blankets. You close your eyes, not entirely comfortable, but fully aware this bed is not just where you sleep, it is where you rule. And so, the medieval night divides again. For peasants, straw and animals. For nobles, carved posts and curtains. The act of sleep reveals hierarchy as starkly as feast or battle. To dream in a curtained bed is to dream in privilege, even if the fleas come with you. If noble beds displayed wealth and peasant huts displayed survival, both still shared one truth. The medieval night was never entirely safe. Beyond fire illness or restless animals, danger prowled in human form. Theft, assault, and suspicion shadowed every hour of darkness, and the act of sleeping, whether upright or wrapped in furs, always carried risk. Picture the street of a small town after curfew. Shutters are drawn, candles, snuffed watchmen pace with staves and lanterns. Yet alleys still harbor figures who slip through shadows. Thieves move silently, lifting latches, cutting purses, or slipping through doors left unbarred. A noble's chamber might be guarded, but servants could be bribed. A peasant's hut had little worth stealing, yet even a loaf of bread or a chicken might draw hungry hands. The sensory impression is uneasy. The distant clop of hooves, the low growl of a dog, the sudden cry of a watchman's "who goes there" pierces the quiet. Inside, sleepers shift uneasily, half awake, half alert. Upright postures bolstered by fear as much as tradition let them stir quickly at the faintest sound. Sleep was shallow because trust was shallow. Quirky records show towns issuing fines for leaving doors unlatched at night. Others employed night wardens who shouted hourly to prove they were awake. In villages, neighbors sometimes formed watch rotations, each family guarding the street in turn. The effort to tame the night was communal, a constant reminder that sleep was never private. Historians still argue whether danger was constant or simply feared. Some towns had low crime, others chronic outbreaks of theft or violence. Yet the perception mattered more than the statistics. People believed the night was dangerous, and that belief shaped their habits upright, rest communal beds, shutters, barred charms hung. Even dreams carried warnings. Modern parallels echo in your world too. Locks, alarms, and streetlights are today's versions of curfews and watchmen's cries. You might still wake at 3 a.m. to a noise heart racing, wondering if danger lurks. The medieval sleeper lived that reality every night without the luxury of reassurance. And so the story comes full circle. The strange truth about sleeping upright in the 1300s was never just about comfort, health, or posture. It was about survival in a world where fire threatened illness, stalked animals, crowded spirits, prowled, and thieves lingered. To lie flat was to surrender too much. To prop yourself upright, cloak pulled tight, was to say, I am not yet a corpse. I am still watchful. I belong to the living. Now, as you drift from this tale into your own night, imagine the quiet settling around you. Not the scratch of chickens or the groan of rafters, but the hum of your room, the steady rhythm of your breath. The medieval world fades its drafty huts and carved beds dissolving into memory. The fears that shape their nights, fire demons, thieves become whispers, no longer yours to carry. Instead, you feel the softness of your pillow, the comfort of modern walls holding firm against the dark. You do not need charms or curfews, no goose to honk at danger, no cloak to guard against icy drafts. The light of your time glows steady, and your rest is safer than kings and peasants ever knew. The cadence slows, stretching like a long exhale. The bed beneath you feels steady, the night around you, gentle. If your thoughts wander, let them like smoke, curling from a dying ember, fading without effort. The story has given you its weight, and now it lets you go. You drift, not upright against fear, but lying comfortably in the ease of the present. Shadows soften, sounds blur, and the world outside slips further away. Soon there is only warmth breath and the steady pull of sleep. And when you wake, remember that you have something even the wealthiest noble lacked, the simple luxury of safety in slumber. Sweet dreams.